Hello and welcome to Heritage University's exclusive Capital Expenditures and Project Planning. Hello, if we have not met before, my name is Melissa Rogers and I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Heritage Property Management Services. Tonight, I will be joined by Mike Foxley and Tim Wiggins of Heritage Construction and Maintenance Company, and they will be reviewing the RFP process, what to expect from project management, and how you can ensure proper processes are done when selecting a vendor. While we will be speaking about community-related topics, this class is meant for pure educational enjoyment only, and any true questions regarding your community's management should be addressed by your association's attorney. Each of you are free to submit your questions in the Q&A section this evening, which is located in the upper right-hand corner. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. However, you are more than welcome to submit your questions throughout the presentation. If this is your first time attending one of our training classes, welcome, and we are so glad that you are here with us. Heritage University offers a number of classes throughout the year, and you can find our schedule by visiting www.heritageproperty.com and selecting Homeowner Resources. Each of you attending tonight's class will be receiving a full recording and a copy of the event with access to all of the questions and instant replay. So let's get our fun started for tonight. I now introduce you to Mike Foxley.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to introduce myself quickly. I'm Mike Foxley. I'll be working with my partner, Tim Wiggins, this evening. And what we want to do today is to go through what is involved in a capital expenditure project. We want to illustrate some of the complexities that we think you might encounter, and we want to talk about what is involved in the planning and development and execution of that. We are going to assume, for the purposes of our presentation, that most of you are board members who are considering this. It may be that not everybody today is, but for the purposes of our class today, we would like to assume that. And how we're going to do that is by explaining how we would do it if you had hired us to actually manage a project on your behalf. Now, we fully understand that not everybody wants to do that, and of course there are plenty of other companies around who provide the same sorts of project management. But as a vehicle to explain it, that's how we're going to present it, as if we were managing a project on your behalf. Before we do start, though, Tim is going to talk a little about our company, Heritage Construction and Maintenance Company, for those of you who might not be familiar with what we can offer you beyond project management. Tim, you're on mute.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. A little bit about us as a company. We are Heritage Construction and Maintenance Company. We are a sister company of Heritage Property Management. And we, a lot of our services, if you could go to the next slide, we offer multiple services to the communities we manage and some communities that we do not manage. We offer repair and maintenance, preventative maintenance, janitorial services, general contracting, and CapEx project management. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, but if you've got questions about any of these items, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to give you some more information. If you could go to the next slide. This is a little bit about our team. Paul Gwynn is the Vice President of Heritage Construction and Maintenance Company. Rebecca Kugel is the Director of Operations. And then there's Mike Foxley, Senior Project Manager, and myself, Senior Project Manager. And I also do insurance claim services. So this is primarily for condos and townhomes, where the Georgia Condominium Act comes into play when it comes to an insurance claim. So that's just a little something that I wanted to throw out there. If you ever have any issues with a claim, I'm more than happy to help you navigate those waters, and we do offer that service to you as a community. So Mike, go ahead. Next slide.
So thank you. Here is the big question. What is a capital expenditure project? What is capital expenditure? Well, capital expenditure is defined as the maintenance or upgrade of a physical fixed asset for a long-term result. In terms of a homeowners association, your assets are the amenities that you have within your community, and by improving those or maintaining them, you should be helping the value of the homes within your community and also increasing the quality of life for the residents within your community. Some examples of the sorts of things that we have had experience with and that you are likely to see would be such as stormwater management, paving and asphalt work, roof replacement, and exterior painting and renovations. Next slide, please. I'd like to talk to you about the planning and development process of project management for a capital expenditure project. This is probably the longest and most involved part of the whole project. You might think the actual construction work would be, but actually the development of it is. We call this the development phase or the discovery phase, as we try and find out with you what you would like to have done and how we're going to approach that. So beginning at the beginning, project conception and budgeting. The most important thing is to identify your project. It might sound trite to say that, but it really is something that's overlooked. And if we could go to the next slide, please. These are the sorts of things that you want to consider in trying to identify your project. What you actually want to do, what you need to do, and what you can afford to do. And how I look at this is there might be young families within your association who are looking for a play area, for example. There might be those people in the community who say, no, we need to spend our money on the tennis courts. And then there's those of you who are the board members who have to look at it and say, well, what can we actually afford to do? And somewhere in the middle of that is the sweet spot, and that's where you decide to spend your money. If we could have the next slide, please. Having identified what you want to do, the next big question is, how are you going to fund it? And it's really important, of course, that you have all this figured out beforehand. Typically, a capital expenditure project is anything over $7,500. I would say that we probably average somewhere around $150,000 to $200,000 on most of our projects that we run. So we're not talking about anything cheap, but please remember, these things are for the long-term benefit. It could be roofing, it could be paving. These are all expensive, involved things. If you're lucky and you are on a board who have had the benefits of planning and had a reserve study, you might have reserve funding set aside for these rainy days when you need it. If you don't, your alternatives are to have possibly a special assessment or even obtaining a loan. Now, these sorts of things are complicated, difficult to handle, but I might remind you that as board members, you have a fiduciary responsibility to your community to spend their money in the maintenance of that community. It shouldn't be sat on and held to make the bank account fat. It needs to be spent. And as unpalatable as that might be, it is something that has to be considered. You have to provide the money to do what you have to do. If you have questions about how you're going to fund it, your community manager is probably able to help you. And also we have our financial services within Heritage who are equipped to deal with that too and assist you. And then finally, I would say, how are you going to manage that? You really need to ask that difficult question of yourselves. Is it something that you can manage yourselves? Is it something that you would look to your community manager to manage? Well, contractually, your community manager is not set up to manage a capital expenditure project. And so your alternative, if you don't do it yourself, is to look at hiring professional help. It's something that we can do if you are interested in what we have to offer, or alternatively, plenty of other companies as well who can help you manage a project just like this. If we can move to the next slide, please.
Sorry, Mike, can we go back one slide? Thank you. The next part of this is going to be communication with homeowners. You want to make sure that you have communicated to the people within your community, what this project is and why it's necessary. So the what and the why are usually pretty critical components. We've run into situations before. I did a project for a community in Southwest Atlanta or Southeast Atlanta, and the community had not been painted in about 15 years. And I had a question from a homeowner for a board meeting that I had attended with them, who said, well, what are we going to lose if we don't paint the property? Because they didn't want to spend the money. They were going to have to do a special assessment and get a loan. And it's just common example of, driving a car. If you don't change the oil in your car, if you don't maintain it, the next time you go into the shop, you're going to end up having to replace an entire engine. And the same can be said for the buildings and the structures that surround you. You want to make sure that you're maintaining those structures to minimize the cost in the long run. So one of the things that we will help you do, especially in the case where you've got to have a special assessment or a loan, is we will hold a town hall meeting with the board of directors and the community themselves, and we can help provide visual aids and help explain why things need to be done a certain way. We want to really be there as an advocate for the board of directors for each community. And then sometimes you can cite the reserve study. I don't know if you have a reserve study, but if you don't, I would highly recommend it. It's very beneficial in you planning for the future and understanding what's coming up and how you need to budget for that now. So the part about this communication with homeowners that's so critical is if you fail to get buy-in from your community, it can often lead to derailment, where the project just kind of falls apart and you don't get any momentum because the community doesn't understand why this is being done and why you're spending their money. So once you've communicated that, now you need to start talking about the whole planning process, where you talk about the defined goals. What is your goal for this project? What are you hoping to accomplish at the end of the day? And in many cases, depending on the size and the scope of the project or the just the nature of the project, you may have to engage other professional services such as an engineer or an architect. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Seaside Condos incident that happened in Miami. And it's my understanding from reading some articles about that, I don't know anything definitively, but they had engaged an engineer who looked and told them that they had a severe problem and it needed to be addressed. And so I'm sure that's something that for a lot of communities, you want to make sure that you're protecting the well-being of the people who you live with. So, and then when you're working on the planning of this, you want to make sure you define clearly the scope of work. What exactly is going to be done? So for example, in a painting project, are we going to paint the handrails? Are we going to paint the front doors? Those are all things that we will help walk through with the board to make sure that you're prepared and you know what everybody's going to be bidding on. This is really critical because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that your bids are apples to apples. And the best way to do that is to go ahead and define the scope of work for them so that everybody's bidding on the same thing. A lot of times people will say, well, let's get a paint bid. One person's going to use this product, another person's going to use this product, and he's going to do this and she's going to do that. And next thing you know, you've got a bunch of bids in front of you and you don't know if they're truly apples to apples. And if you're really looking at, dollar figures that are measurable in that instance. So then you got to start thinking about the nuances of your property. A lot of communities have different things to where, maybe you can put a trash can in this area, but you can't put one in this area, or a dumpster. And thinking about where you're going to put the porta-john, if it's going to be a long project, several weeks or more, where the crew's going to store their materials and the supplies for the project. So a lot of those things that we have to really kind of think about. Maybe the back of one building, the access is very limited, and it's 3-4 stories up on the back side. Well, we need to start looking at those things to make sure that when the contractors come out to bid on it, they know what they're dealing with, so that your numbers are accurate. And once we have all of that information, we take that scope of work and we plug it into a request for proposal. And that request for proposal is something that will go out to multiple contractors for them to bid on that. So this is another way that we make sure that we're getting apples to apples. That will be presented to the board for you to review and make sure that you're good with the scope of work that's outlined inside of it. And then once that happens, we will send it out to bid. And I'll let Mike talk about contractor selection.
Yeah, once we've received our bids, we typically qualify those bids. And what we do is we look for any numbers which are out of whack. Ideally, as Tim said, your bids are apples for apples, but occasionally you can have somebody who perhaps has misinterpreted the intent of the RFP, perhaps made a math error. And we want to try to iron that out before we would present. And with that, we would then send you an executive summary. And the intent of that is that you can quickly and easily see all the numbers, one against the other, in order to help you make a decision. And we would talk you through why those numbers are the way they are as best we can, and help you in your choice. What I would like to stress is that we never say you need to use this contractor. We would never point at one contractor and say do this or do that. All of the people we would present to you would be qualified, capable, insured, and available and ready to do the work, but we would never say one over the other. It's important to stress that if you were to work with Heritage Construction as your project managers, we would be acting as the agent of the board. We are not the contractor, and sometimes that can get confused. So your contract, the person you select to work with, will sign a contract directly with you as the HOA. Once we get to that point, you've made a selection, we would go to that particular contractor and say, you need to develop a contract. It comes from the contractor to the HOA. And when we get that, the sorts of things that need to be included in that is reference to the scope of work. So you know that they are going to address the things that are specified. It ought to also address how you handle a change order, because unfortunately, there are always unknowns, and you will always have things that require a change order. We should also address payment schedules, terms of payment, things like warranties and liens, and also not on this list, but we should also be talking about how to handle disputes, because unfortunately it does happen. That's just the way it is. And finally, we would also stress that any contract that you have is run in front of an attorney. It's very important to do that. The contract is there to protect all parties involved in it, not just the contractor, not just yourselves. And it needs to be an equitable document that can make sure that we are in a place to move forward with the project. Next slide, please.
So now that you've done all the pre-work or the planning of everything that is going to happen, we move into the management of the project. And first thing we start off with is a pre-construction. Some of it is kind of an overlap with what we talked about before. You want to talk about influencing factors about the community itself. That would fall in line with property nuances and things of that nature. Again, where you're going to put the porta-john, the dumpster, and store materials and supplies. So you want to make sure you work all of that out beforehand with the contractor so that everybody's on the same page and we're not putting a porta-john right next to somebody's bedroom window where you end up having a homeowner who's very upset. Then you'll start talking about the schedule. When are you going to start? How long do you anticipate that it's going to take? Is weather going to be an influencing factor? And so, you know, a lot of those things you want to try to get that down and understand. You know, if a contractor says with no rain, it's going to take us 5 weeks to do the project, I typically will tell the community through an email blast that we're looking at a 7 to an 8 week project, just because it works out a lot easier if they're able to finish early. Then people are a lot more pleased and satisfied with that. So, and then of course the logistics, you know, who's going to be posting the notices, again, materials, supplies, things like that. And then communication. Communication is key. Our role as project managers for this project is to communicate directly with you, the board members. And, you know, throughout the management of a project, you're going to get questions from people in our community. And we've got some ways that I'll discuss a little bit later on how we make sure we're communicating with you exactly how the project's going, and, you know, if there's been any changes or what's happening or why did somebody not work today? Well, we know it was because it rained. So, so those are all the things that we take care of. And then you move into project oversight, and you got to start thinking about who's responsible, who's going to be running this project, who's going to be out there making sure that work is progressing and happening in the way that it's supposed to. And then, of course, change orders. We tell communities all the time when you're planning for a CapEx project, it's always safe to assume you're going to get anywhere from 10 to 20% in change orders. It's our goal at the end of the day to not have any change orders. That's what we hope for. But many times, an example, I'll show you some pictures of this project later. You don't know what you're dealing with until you start removing materials. And we had a community with they were redoing a pool house, and once we were just going to take it down to the studs and then start building back. Well, once we got down to the studs, we saw that many of the studs were rotten, and that had to be changed and updated. And then, of course, job scope creep. Scope creep is where you're dealing with a project and your scope of work has been defined, but now that you're doing this and you're working on these buildings, maybe one of the board members says, you know what, the handrails on this building that's not a part of this project need to be painted. Well, that would be something that we call job scope creep. And we typically want to try to avoid that. Sometimes it's a minor deal and it's not that big of a deal, because sometimes that can derail a project as well, or just cause everybody to kind of get a little bit distracted as to what the actual goal of the project is. And just to make sure that everybody understands, when we do project management, we are managing the project alone. So whatever that scope of work is, that's what we're managing. Now, if you ask us to bring in and do a change order for something that was not originally in the scope of work, that's something that we can do, but it doesn't mean that every little thing that goes wrong on a property, we're now the project manager for that. We are specifically set up for the project itself. So, and then quality control. Quality control is really something that is up to the contractor themselves to make sure that they're cleaning up after themselves. But we do everything in our power to make sure we kind of stay on top of them, to make sure that that's something that they are paying attention to, because they need to understand that these are people's residences, and we don't want to see water bottles laying around and trash left overnight. Sometimes when they're working, it can be a bit of a mess, but as long as they're cleaning up at the end of the day, that's kind of the things that we're looking for. So, and then again, communication, going back, we want to make sure we're posting notices on the buildings that are about to be worked on at least 48 hours before work begins. And then also making sure we're communicating with you as board members to make sure everything goes smoothly. And then I'll let Mike talk for a minute about challenges to a project.
If we could have the next slide, please. Actually, I think we need to go to slide 11. Thank you, 10. So unfortunately, as much as we would like everything to go smoothly, there are always challenges. And at Heritage, we have a mantra, if you like, where we want to try to make sure that expectations are clearly expressed and everybody knows, whatever the situation throughout our company, what the expectations are. And so much as I would like to say that we don't have difficulties, you do have difficulties. And so I think it's only important that I can stress that today. Typically, we end up with what I call project fatigue. And really what that is you have to think about this. You're entering into a relationship with a contractor and with ourselves, and everything starts off very nicely. We have the honeymoon period, and then things begin to fade a bit. And there are some delays or some other factors that might influence that. And that warmth wanes. But as your project managers, our job is to keep things on track, to work through the difficulties and try to get over that. Some of the things that can influence that are the fact that we have multiple parties involved. We have a board of directors. We can have other elements like engineers. We can have multiple contractors, and they are always stepping on each other's toes. It could be the crew themselves, the guys who are actually doing the work. We spent months planning a project, and yet that doesn't filter down to the guys who are actually have the boots on the ground, and they can really throw things off course if we're not careful. Likewise, some of the homeowners can. Think about those people who wanted their play area, and it was the tennis courts that won out. They can quite easily derail a project. I've had situations where there's been petitions being passed around where people are taking surreptitious photographs of the work, saying it's not being done properly and so forth. And it just creates a nasty atmosphere to work in. So these are some of the challenges that you can expect. Of course, cost overrun, Tim's talked about that a lot. And also the other thing is the availability of people to do the work. You would say we need to be working, and let's get this finished, but that is not always possible. And weather, unfortunately, particularly tonight is a good example, the weather is a big factor, and rain can really throw things off. Next slide, please. Back one, please. Thank you. So completion of a project. We've put an awful lot of effort into it. You as a board have invested your time and efforts as well. And we want to make sure that as we've had our highs and lows, that we end up on a high, and that you as the customer actually receive what you have been promised. And how we do that is by, of course, the management of the project and the oversight of the project during its course, but also focusing very much on the completion. There's a term in the industry which is punching a project, and what that means is taking a really close look at the work that needs to be done, to the details that need to be done to finish it off. It's dotting the I's and crossing the T's, if you like. And we would go with you as board members and the contractor and review everything that's been done and make sure that you're satisfied with it. We produce a list, which is a standard way of interacting with the contractor, that they have absolutely no doubt this is what they need to do finally to finish. And then we give them about 10 days to finish that up. And at that point, they will have invoiced for substantial completion. And they are looking very much for their last check for final completion. And they won't get that until they're absolutely satisfied. And that's where we hold them to the fire to make sure that those details are done correctly. During that period, we'd also be looking to reconcile all the finances. There could be multiple invoices, change orders, all that sort of stuff that can get quite confusing. We want to make sure that all the numbers are correct. We want to make sure you have the warranty documents. We want to make sure that you've got lien releases and so forth. And then finally, we would say, are we ready to sign off? And we produce a certificate of final completion, which is a way of underlining the end of a project. Everybody knows that it's done, and from this point forwards, anything else is a warranty item. It makes sure that you as customers are satisfied. It makes sure that the contractor is satisfied, and that we have delivered what we have said we will deliver to. Next slide, please.
So now we're going to talk about the tool that we have adopted to use for our communication to make sure that you as board members are completely aware of what's going on with the project. We started using a new software called buildertrend. Actually, it's new. Well, we've been using it a couple of years now, but it's been around for a little while. But this basically puts the entire project at your fingertips so that you have access to this information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's an app that you can download on your phone. You can access it from your desktop computer through the website. And once you sign up and you agree to do a project with us and our supervision, then we'll send you the password and the links and help you get set up with all of that. So, but what this software does is, as soon as Mike and I come out to a project, once the project starts, we're typically there every day. One of us is there. Sometimes if I'm out of the office, Mike will fill in for me and vice versa. But you're going to be getting an update almost every single day that work is being done. Now, if it's raining outside, we're not driving to the property. We're just going to update buildertrend and let you know, hey, no work's happening today because it's raining, or conditions are too humid or moist or whatever. And you're going to receive those daily project updates with current weather conditions. Every single update that you get shows the current weather conditions. So sometimes with asphalt seal coating and sometimes with painting, you cannot paint or apply those materials to a surface when temperatures are below 40 degrees. It'll cause problems down the road for you. So we want to make sure we're documenting all of that information. It's an easy way for you to communicate with your project manager. As you can see on the screen here, my name is here at the top of this particular slide. It's got our main office number, but I believe once we're managing a project for you, you would have my direct line to my office extension. And so you would have all that information. You're able to keep track. If you look over on the left-hand side, there's the general address for the property. You've got budget numbers on there, the contract price, any change orders that have come about. And then over to the right, you will see that there are multiple different sections that have information for you. So we'll keep track of the budget, the scheduling. We can use calendars and Gantt charts. Some projects that we do as CapEx projects, you're really only working with one vendor, so a Gantt chart doesn't necessarily make sense, but it's a tool for us to be able to track who needs to do what when. So if you're doing a pool house remodel and you've got multiple different contractors coming in, then you want to make sure that you have some kind of schedule in place to say, okay, well, this needs to be done before somebody starts on this work. So that's what that's for. And then also it helps you to track the change orders. Change orders are inevitable. They're a part of every project, and you'll be able to look at those, review them, and actually approve or deny those change orders through the buildertrend software. And then of course, punch list, as Mike was talking about just a few moments ago. This is a software that allows us to take detailed pictures, make detailed notes about where we see things that need to be addressed. We can send that directly to the contractor so that they know what needs to be done. And then we also maintain control of that information so that once they say that the work is complete on those punch list items, we can return to the site and know exactly what we're looking for to confirm whether or not it's been done. If you would jump to the next slide, please. This is a project that I did over in Roswell. This particular community had a pool house at their pool that was very dated, as you can see. I mean, not exactly beautiful. They also have this storage container to the left of the building, or not container, but storage shed. They have that storage shed over there, and their HOA documents actually say that homeowners are not permitted to have that, and the board actually had one by the pool to store some of the materials. So they thought, okay, it's time to do some renovations to the pool house. The covered area, it's very difficult to see in this picture, was relatively small. I mean, probably only 5 or 6 feet deep. And they wanted to have a little bit more shade for parents who were just there watching their kids swim or whatever. And you can see a little bit clearer on the list as to what's happening. There are to-dos, unread documents. We store all the documents related to the project in here, messages, pending change orders, things of that nature. So this is where you can kind of keep track of everything that's going on with the project. So, and down at the bottom, you can see some of the pictures that I was telling you about. You know, we took it down to the studs, found some studs that were rotten, and had to do some additional work through change orders on that to make sure that we were up to compliance. So we'll come back to this project. So kind of take a mental picture of that building right there, and you'll see the drastic difference that happened after that. If you would move to the next slide. This is an example of your daily logs. You'll see off to the, not the far left, but the left of the main section in the middle of the page, the date, the weather conditions, and then there's also going to be multiple photos and or a video if it calls for it. So at any day, any time of day, any night, whenever, if you're walking down your neighborhood and somebody says, well, I didn't see anybody working today, you can pull this up on your phone and say, actually, they were working, and here's a picture of them doing that. So we try to make sure that we're, you know, keeping you informed as a board member so that when those questions do come, you have an answer ready to go. So next slide, please. We also use this software as a means to store project documents and plans. So you'll have, if you've got any architectural plans or engineering plans, they'll be stored in here, your supervision agreement with HCMC, your contract with the contractor, any documents that need to be in here. Certificate of completion is always added once the project is complete. Custodian reports or whatever documentation that comes at the end of the project can be added to this as well. And you've got one platform that's going to store all of this information for you. You can open it up and download it if you want to create your own file in OneDrive or one of the other online cloud storage programs. So, you know, whichever way you want to do it, but we maintain this and keep the information in here. So next slide, please. This is an example of the change orders. And this particular project, I kind of blocked out some of the numbers and the signature and things of that nature. We don't want to give out too much information for that, but we'll put that change order into buildertrend, make sure that we document everything that's going on with that change order, why it needs to happen. Typically, we're going to let you know what the purpose of that change order was for and whether or not it's necessary. You know, there may be a change order that pops up where it's not really a necessary change order, but it might be a good idea to do it. Well, that one you would have the option to either approve that or deny it. But in cases like what we just looked at, where we're breaking it down to the studs and you've got studs that are completely rotten, then, you know, that's kind of a critical component. That's a structural issue. And if you don't approve that, then the project just comes to a dead halt because the contractor is not going to keep going forward and try to warranty a project that is not properly and structurally sound. So we're about to move into a couple of next slides. I just want to briefly go through this project that I showed you the picture of the pool house before. This is just an example of what it looks like now. We were still kind of in the project doing a few little change order things. We've got the new very large covered area, cedar timbers framing out the gables on either end. With additional ceiling fans. In the middle, you've got a granite countertops. You can go to the next slide. There's tongue and groove wood on the roof. These cedar columns were 1 foot by 1 foot, and I believe that each column was $500 a piece. So which in today's money, that's probably double that. with the way the economy's been going. And then also we've added those 2 white doors on the end. That's the new addition to the building. That area was completely brand new, and that's where they can store a lot of their pool equipment and furniture and things of that nature during the winter seasons. And this particular community has a lifeguard who's usually on duty, and they've got the complete lifeguard set up just to the left once you walk in the doors. So it's a great asset and a great feature for them. And then we added some additional lighting that you actually cannot see in this photo because that was purely intentional. If you'll go to the next photo, we did some uplighting from the top of the cedar columns just to kind of give it that indirect light feature, so that as you're staying out there, I took this very early in the morning, but as you're staying out there, as the evening starts to come upon you and it starts to get a little bit dark, you've still got a little bit of light out there. The granite countertops, there's a sink, there's outlets above it, so you can put crock pots if you're having a party, whatever you want. Go to the next slide, please. Here's a little bit more of a close-up, so you can kind of see what exactly it looks like. I'm incredibly proud of this project. I really like how it turned out, and I know the community was very happy as well. Next slide. Okay, so as you can tell from everything that we've talked about tonight, there's a lot of detail that goes into managing a capital expenditure project. There's a lot of factors that you have to think of. And we understand that you guys are board members. Somebody may have some construction experience, and that's great. You know, we don't want to step on anybody's toes, but sometimes you've got people who are in different industries and they don't really think about all the things that we do on a daily basis as Heritage Construction and Maintenance Company. And so it can take a whole lot of time. There's a lot of time in the RFP development, getting all the bids, making sure that we review everything. If anything's off, talking to the contractors and saying, hey, your number's a little bit off here. I think you might need to go back and sharpen your pencil, kind of take a look at this again. And that way we're taking care of all of that so that you're presented with the information that you need to make a decision. And we're never going to recommend a contractor to you directly. The people that we're going to invite to the table, that we would invite to the table, are people that we trust and we have been working with for years. But if you want us to invite someone else, we're always happy to invite someone else to bid on that project. So one of the benefits that we can pass along to you as a community is many people don't really do projects like this on a regular basis. This may be 4 or 5 years or maybe even longer between one project and the next. And so we want to make sure we're offering to you the benefit of being with a team who's part or sister companies with Heritage Property Management. A lot of these contractors, they're very much concerned that we're going to call them the next time we want to bid a project. So it's in their best interest to make sure that everything is done well and that the customer is satisfied at the end of the day. There have been times that projects didn't end well, and those contractors were not bid or were not invited to bid on any further projects. We are familiar with most of the CapEx projects that you're going to run into. I believe the slide says all, but there are some issues or there's some different projects where we may not have the experience to be able to offer you the best advice and direction. However, you know, if we've run into something, maybe it's a high-rise condo and, you know, working on the EFS on the outside of the building, we would say, hey, that's a little beyond our skis. Let me give you a couple of recommendations on who you could talk to and help you out with that. So we're here to help you out. Again, we have multiple relationships with multiple contractors. I talked about that a little bit. And then it says on here 2022 projects. It's not too early to start. I would actually say you're probably running out of time at this point. We're running into a lot of delays, especially with the way things have been going over this past year. There are material shortages. There are delays in shipping. So there's a lot of different things. If you're planning on doing some work in your pool, you really need to be starting to talk about that during the pool season so that once the pool season comes to a close, you can begin the work because there's always a lot of planning and a lot of things that have to go into it. So with that being said, you know, we're here for you. We want to serve you and help you as a community. and to help you kind of navigate these confusing waters and a lot of what's going on. So I guess now I'll turn it over to Melissa and we'll jump into some Q&A. Thank you for your time.
Yes, we've got some great questions. So we're going to kind of take this back to the very beginning. Does CapEx support new construction projects? The example of that being new amenities, those types of items.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yes.
we could do that. Anything that's over $7,500 would be something that we could help you with.
Yes. Suppose you wanted to put a tennis court in your community and you haven't got one. You have the space for it. That's an enhancement. It's definitely considered as a capital expenditure project.
Okay. Next we have, do you, and I know you gentlemen just recently answered this question, but just to make sure that everybody got a chance very clearly to hear the question and the answer, do you, HCMC, do you help HOAs in contract selection?
Well, what we like to do is to facilitate the contract process. We are not attorneys, and we would make sure that, well, we would recommend at least that any contracts go in front of an attorney, but we can facilitate the negotiations that go into developing that contract. Hope that answers. Please let us know if it doesn't.
All right, so this question has been asked a few times, so I'm just going to ask it once. What are Heritage's, and by Heritage they mean HCMC, what are Heritage's rates for managing these capital improvement projects? Do you bill time and materials, fixed price, and so forth? And yes, and so they're asking essentially, what is your cost for these types of project management services?
I would say that we don't necessarily deal with time and material. That's going to be more along the lines of the contractor. But our standard fees usually fall. We charge about $1,000 up front, and that's for the development of the RFP to engage our services and make sure we're headed in the right direction, in the direction that you want to go as a community. And then once we present the executive summary to the board of directors, which would be a one-page document on the front of a bunch of following pages that kind of gives you an overview of every bid that's been submitted. Behind that's going to follow each bid from each contractor so that you have all that information, full disclosure, you have everything, followed by the request for proposal, the RFP. And so it would be $1,000 up front, $1,000 for the executive summary, and then we just charge 5% of the project on an average basis. So some projects may require a little bit more or less, but you know, I would say that's pretty standard across the board for us.
Really, it's something that's negotiable, and our boss likes to be involved in those communications with you as a board to work with you on that. And as Tim said, it depends on the value of it. It depends upon the amount of work that's involved in it. It depends on the amount of liability that is presented as well. There's a lot of factors that go to it. So we're not involved in the materials and all the rest of it. That's the contractor. We have professional fees that meet the services. And why we do it on a percentage basis, you might be wondering that, is because we don't know necessarily what the cost of the project is going to be in the long run. It could drag on for forever, and therefore it's done on a percentage basis. So that's really why we do that, because it's hard to pin down exactly what that might be.
All right. This is one of my favorite questions. So thank you to this person that asked it. Should a lien release be obtained for all projects? Thank you so much.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Actually, it's a requirement that we have at Heritage Construction, is that every invoice that's submitted has a lien release with it, or a lien waiver with it, and then at the end of it, a lien release. because the purpose of that is to protect the contractor and make sure that they are getting paid, but is also to protect you, so that you don't have any liens placed on the community at the end of it. And if we've done everything correctly, then financially everything is in agreement, and we're not trying to hold any money back or anything like that. But yes, that is, suppose you weren't doing it with us, yes, you really need to do that. Really need to do that.
Yes, I second that with the really need to do that. All right, our next question is, our community currently is in the discussing/planning phase of building out our amenities. So there, it sounds to me like they're still under declarant control potentially. Right now, we only have a playground and pavilion, which we are not sure we will keep if it's not beneficial to the community. It appears that your group not only assists with capital improvements, but with renovations on existing amenities. Would you be able to assist in a project like that, gentlemen?
Yes, we would.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's times when we're looking at what might need to be done and what you might want to do, that it doesn't necessarily fall under the type of project where we would say you might want to engage outside contractors to do it. And as Heritage Construction is also a general contractor, we can offer our services, and in that case it would be us kind of managing, if you like, our own work. So we might be the general contractor rather than the project manager on that. But yes, absolutely, and I'm sure we will offer it up later. But if you have any questions, any that you would like to present to us directly, please do get in touch with us and ask us, and we'll assist as best we can.
Thank you for clarifying that. There's oftentimes some confusion surrounding project management versus you being qualified to actually submit a proposal for actual work. So looks like the next question that we have is a bit more property management related. So gentlemen, if you don't mind, I'm going to take this one. If we're in a situation where the total expenditures needed, oh, hold on, put that question back because I can't read it. Oh, sorry. Hold on one second. I can't find it. Sorry, friends. Uh-oh. I don't know where it went, Kate. Can you put it back for me, please? So sorry, friends. Okay, hold on. I'm trying to go back to where it is. All right. If we're in a situation where the total expenditures needed exceed our total income, what are your suggestions for ways to increase assessments that are acceptable to the homeowners? Okay. So the reason why I'm taking that one is because that one is a bit more property management related. So obviously, hopefully, if you're partnering with a property management company, you might have a manager that might assist you with some of your options, which may include a loan, special assessment, specific assessments, depending on the type of work that you're doing. Or you might just have to increase the assessments maybe over the next 2 years and do some future funding for some work that might need to be completed. So the role here that Heritage Construction and Maintenance would offer under the project management guys would then, in their executive summary, bring this information to the board for review, where then you either with the board consider what your options are financially, and that does sometimes include that you might need to increase your assessments. We also do see some associations that maybe have an expenditure that pops up. Let's say, for example, you have a reserve study, and those tennis courts that Mike was talking about earlier, those are slated for 2025, but unfortunately, we've had a tremendous water event that has eroded court number 4, and it needs to be expedited. That is a little bit of a different situation and should absolutely be revisited in totality if that was a planned expenditure included in your reserve study. So thank you so much. I am now going to go back to questions. I believe we have 2 more left. Okay. What would be Capital X role in assisting the board with selecting a land developer for a new build amenities project? Do you have the capability in-house, which we did kind of talk about that for Declarant Developer Services? Carolyn, we have your contact information and we will certainly reach out to you for information. All right. The last question that we have, I believe right here, is once Heritage receives an invoice, how soon can the contract expect to be paid? Go ahead, gentlemen. And this is assuming that there is a lien release attached to that invoice. Go ahead.
I'm not exactly sure how long it takes, because it depends upon the accounting department. It also depends upon whether that check is going to be cut in-house or whether it's going to be mailed. But typically, it's within about a 30-day period. And very normally, a contractor would have in their contract net 30 terms. In other words, 30 days from submittal to payment. And as long as everything's approved and in line, and that's very much part of what Tim and I do, we receive the invoices, we check them to make sure that it matches the work that's been done and that the documentation is correct, and then we submit that to the community manager to process that and put it through accounting for payment, but within 30 days.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, that actually wraps up our questions and answers for the evening. Thank you so much for your patience. And on behalf of Heritage Property Management Services, Heritage Construction and Maintenance, and Heritage University, we sincerely thank you for your time this evening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you very much.